Throughout my life, I've played a lot of different kinds of video games. Shooters, platformers, fighters, you name a genre, and chances are I took a crack at it at some point in my life. And that's the great thing about video games, the abundance. There are so many to choose from that chances are you'll find something you love sooner than later. But what about me? What kind of games do I love? Well, I like a myriad of different things. I like fighters, shooters, visual novels, RPGs, and indie experiments, just to name a few. But there's one genre in particular that I have a love-hate relationship with: the open world game. What's an open world game? Well, it's usually defined as a game that lets the player explore a large, open world with plenty of freedom to choose what you want to do next. At least, that's how I'd define it. A game that offers an expansive suite of tools and toys to the player that they can use to solve challenges or obstacles or whatever. Maybe the game is non-linear and allows a player to approach any objective at any given time, being fully open from the word go. Maybe the game is non-linear but still bottlenecks the player into completing missions in a specific order. Maybe the game is a strange combination of the two, where there are large overarching objectives that are completed by solving smaller objectives in any order you want. An open world can be amazing if done right, and horrible if done wrong. An open world game can be a lot of different things too. It can be a shooter, an RPG, or even a survival game. Survival games, huh? Now that's something I haven't played in a while. I remember when there was this big boom of survival games not too long ago. You know, games like Rust, The Forest, Don't Starve. It's weird. There was a big surge of them and it felt like you couldn't take 2 steps without tripping over one. Games where you had to scavenge and get by with limited supplies and tools, managing a limited inventory and limited resources. Maybe you have a hunger and a thirst meter that you have to periodically fill, or maybe you just have to survive for a limited time before rescue comes. Wait, that sounds familiar. Surviving, limited time, open world. Wait a second. Oh yeah, Dead Rising. Dead Rising is a game that you should play. No. Actually, Dead Rising is a game that you need to play. Nothing quite compares, not even the games that follow it in the same series. There's a lot to say about Dead Rising, from its mechanics to its story. I mean, there's never a dull moment. Everything seems planned to a T, and it's a tightly crafted experience. Not an ounce of effort was wasted when they made this masterpiece, and it's never more obvious than during gameplay. The game itself isn't that long, truth be told. It's set over the course of 3 days, but each day is only 2 hours long in real time, and that's a grand total of 6 hours. But in those 6 hours, they manage to take you on an absolute ride that challenges a player thoroughly. It's the kind of game that keeps you on your toes without coming across as too complex. A lot of ideas and mechanics in Dead Rising are simple. It's just how the developers have mixed and matched these mechanics. But this is a topic that needs some room to breathe. I mean, I can't just tell you about the game in like 10 or 20 minutes like I did with the others before this. We need to take a look at the game mechanics, characters, the plot, and everything tangential to it all. And given how long this script is, I'm guessing it might be a while. So maybe sit back, grab a drink, pour yourself something bougie, and listen to why you need to play Dead Rising. Hey, aren't zombies great? Dead Rising is a game by Capcom that came out August 8th, 2006. It's hard to believe it's been 15 years since its release, but here we are. This is personally one of my favorite games, and I think you should play it too. It's tightly designed and it's well put together. It offers a lot for the player to play around with. Dead Rising is peak Xbox 360 gaming, which is funny since it was a release title for the console, but I get ahead of myself. The game opens up with Frank on a chartered helicopter on its way to Willamette, Colorado. This cutscene establishes that Frank is a photojournalist who is on his way to Willamette in search of a scoop. a story that will earn him a Pulitzer. The city has been quarantined, and Frank finds this fishy. Him and the pilot, Ed DeLuca, talk a bit and drop some not too subtle foreshadowing.
About the only thing to do in this town is kill time at the shopping mall. Say, buddy. About the only thing to do in this town is kill time at the shop.
Before flying over a military blockade. And it's at that point the player will have figured out that it's zombies. Something that Frank won't figure out for a little bit longer, but who cares? Just play the game, man. Just play the game. Eventually, some military helicopters catch up to Frank and tell him to leave the city. Frank tells the pilot to fly over the mall so he can jump onto the roof, and then jumps onto the roof, and then Frank tells the pilot to jump onto the roof. Him and the pilot jump onto the roof. It's here that we meet Carlito, who, after watching Frank jump out of a helicopter, says,
"You came by helicopter, didn't you?" What?
Finding Carlito is kind of weird. Frank heads inside. Frank ends up in the entrance plaza inside the mall proper, where he finds some survivors building a barricade. More than that, he finds out why the city has been quarantined.
What? Did you just say zombies?
He also sees a woman that seems of interest, but is probably nothing. Who cares? What the fuck is wrong with your eyes? Frank is told to grab some supplies for the barricade and chances upon this old man walking around. And, well...
Madonna! My Madonna is out there!
What are you thinking?
Get off! Oh, wait, baby! I'm saving you, baby! Wait for me, sweetie! Madonna!
It's hard to believe that these survivors couldn't stop one old woman, but hey, whatever. The plot needs to happen, so might as well happen now. A man tells everyone to run to the security room, but Frank is the only one to make it.
Where are the others?
I don't know. I hope they got away.
As long as those things are in the mall.
Jesus, Otis, you're gonna go blind.
We better not use this door.
What are you doing?
The air ducts. They'll get us back into the mall.
The man opens the vent and says it leads to the roof, ensuring that they have a way to get back into the mall. But then this lady asks if Frank's a photographer, and Frank's like,
As a matter of fact, I am.
She goes through his pictures and sees the old man. Frank's on the entrance plaza, and that's when Frank notices the man seems kind of important. But the woman is tight-lipped. Her name is Jessie, and the man from before was named Brad. This introduction to the game works really well in setting up the story and introducing gameplay. You're given a little bit of freedom to move around and get a feel for Frank's movement before the game throws you into the deep end once all the zombies get into the mall. As weak as early game Frank is, a player needs to be cautious and try to avoid the hordes of zombies during this section of gameplay. From the start, there seems to be a lot of intrigue about the city of Willamette. Why are there zombies everywhere? What happened to the city? Who are these two people, and why are they acting so secretive? With the intrigue now built, the game finally opens up. At least, it does right after Otis stops you and hands you a map and a radio. The map is especially helpful to a new player since the mall itself is rather large and sprawling, and the radio allows Otis and friends to call Frank and let him know what's going on in the mall, or if he's spotted something interesting on the monitors. Frank uses the vents to get back into the mall and finds himself on the rooftop of Paradise Plaza. It's here where we meet the first two survivors of the game, Natalie and Jeff, and where Dead Rising tutorializes survivors as a gameplay element. No matter who you speak to first, Natalie or Jeff, they will join you as a companion. As far as tutorials go, Dead Rising does a wonderful job letting the players figure out what they're supposed to do for many aspects of the game. The major mechanics are set up as mini tutorials when you first encounter them, and most are accompanied by these text boxes as well. In this instance, the player has to interact with these survivors more than once to get them to join. It's a useful bit of knowledge to have since most survivors require that you talk to them more than once anyway. Thankfully, the rooftop is empty apart from these two survivors, so you don't need to worry about zombies eating them just yet. It's here the game tells you how to command followers. You can press a button to call them and they will follow Frank, or you can point to a spot within eyesight and tell them to go there instead. This system does the job well enough when it comes to escorting survivors, but we'll talk about that more later. Since there aren't many variables on this roof to distract the player, zombies, uneven terrain, strict time limit, these two survivors are basically freebies. The game shows you that some survivors might need more than just a chat to follow Frank back to the safe house too, since bringing one of the couple to the other will trigger a small event where they hug each other and then he or she will follow you. The second person you talk to won't follow you if you don't have the first person with you. This also shows that some survivors can interact with each other in important ways, so it might be useful to keep that in mind. Speaking of the safe house, it's probably time to take them back. Damn, that's a lot of experience. Oh yeah, PP, or prestige points, are how the game keeps track of Frank's level. Think of it like gaining experience. With that out of the way, Frank can now sneak back into the mall, and there are two separate exits on the roof to the warehouse below it. Either you take the elevator or this door. In the warehouse, there are a few boxes and items that Frank can grab, which is decent enough. Everything seems calm at first.
Zombies, huh? Had a feeling you'd show up. Oh, God, it's you. Look, don't sneak up on me.
Oh hey Jesse. I was wondering where the plot went. It seems that Frank had inadvertently given Jessie a sprained ankle, meaning she can't provide backup for Brad. Frank feels an obligation to help since he's the one that accidentally caused Jessie's sprained ankle.
Let me help.
No, I can't let a civilian do that. That's against regulations.
Yeah, well, I don't think they had zombie-infested malls in mind when they wrote those regulations, kid.
You know how to use this?
I've covered wars, you know.
He said it! He said the line! And with that, we're given a gun and introduced to the case system. The case system is how Dead Rising structures its survivors and story content. Every story beat in the game will be represented by a chunk in this handy chart. It foreshadows how long a case might be, given how many squares are on display. Case 1 has 4 squares, so it's natural to assume it's going to be a longer one. I also like the phrasing on the menu. Case. Side missions are often referred to as scoops as well, which is a nice touch. It really puts the player in Frank's shoes, and it's easy to imagine how he sees these events as scoops or cases that he can report on. The main story is experienced by completing these cases in order, so failing one means you won't be able to experience the next. A player can't re-enter the story halfway through, for example. Scoops and side missions, on the other hand, aren't as important. Following this cutscene, Frank is finally given complete freedom to do whatever he wants. A player can spend time in different parts of the mall and get to know its layout, or just dick around with zombies. At the beginning, the gate leading from Paradise Plaza to the entrance plaza is closed, meaning players will have to exit through the courtyard if they want to visit another part of the mall. This gate won't open until after Case 2-2, which is a little bit later in the game. I feel like this is a great choice in terms of level design, funneling first-time players in a general direction instead of leaving them completely directionless. It allows the game designers to easily show a player where they might want to explore first. This means that first-time players will be introduced to the courtyard early on, which is a fairly important part of the mall. Meanwhile, experienced players will already know the gist. The gate opens up quickly, so it's not like they're leaving you completely high and dry. They just wanted to give you that gentle nudge. If the player tries to enter the entrance plaza from the other entrance, the one in Alfresca, they will find there is another gate blocking them off. The game rarely bars the player from entering an area of the mall, and this early set of gates is an exception rather than the rule. Paradise Plaza also makes for a great introductory area, given its layout and its abundance of variety. There are a few jewelry stores, some toy stores, a few bookstores, we'll talk about those later, a food court, a sports store, a cheekily named sandwich shop, a few music stores, a movie theater, and finally, a nearby restroom. Restrooms are how the player saves a game, with a few exceptions. Show the bench in the security room. Being able to save wherever you're standing would no doubt break the game in half. Save scumming would be abundant and become the norm for a game as challenging as Dead Rising can be. Making a player venture to a specific location to save their progress turns the act of saving into a small chore, something you have to go out of your way to do. What this does is make saving something the player has to weigh in their mind versus other activities like exploring or saving survivors. You could spend that extra minute venturing to a save location just to make sure you don't have to redo a certain event or guide these survivors any further than you need to, but going out of your way to do so will cause a small chunk of time. Well, a lot of the challenge in Dead Rising comes from dealing with the game's strict timer. Oh, did I mention you're on a timer? That's right. The moment Frank sets foot on the roof of the mall, a clock starts ticking. He has 3 days before that helicopter comes back to get him.
There's a helicopter coming.
Frank, I just said that. Every case and story beat occurs within a certain time frame. If you can't show up to a scoop on time, it will result in a failure. This includes both the main story and any other scoops that aren't related to it. In fact, one of the scoops punishes you for showing up late. The first day of the mall is the most lax in terms of a time limit. You can check your watch to see what time it is and what scoops are active as well. Your scoops are shown on the right when you check your watch, and they're also color-coded to show a rough estimate of how much time is left to complete them. Blue means you have over 6 in-game hours to complete the scoop, yellow means that you have under 6, and red means that you have under 3. 1 real-life second equals 12 in-game seconds. So 1 day in the game is equal to 2 hours in real time. This means that the story mode, also known as 72-hour mode, is just 6 hours long. The first case gives the player a generous amount of time to complete it. The case itself expires at 5 p.m. It works well to ease a player into the time-based structure of the game. Given how lax the first case is, a player can spend more time getting to grips with the controls or exploring parts of the mall that are open to them. Since the zombies just got into the mall, there aren't many roaming around at first. But as the game goes on, more and more will spawn in various parts of the mall. In bigger hordes, I mean. Zombies are a major threat in the early game, since a low-level Frank won't have many options to deal with them. His stats are so low and his attacks are so weak that diving headfirst into a massive crowd at the start of the game is an easy way to get yourself killed. So the game takes it easy on Frank by giving him plenty of room to avoid them on the first day. You'll see zombies clustered together in small hordes scattered throughout any given wing of the mall. Interruptions and challenges are also low at the start as a result. Dead Rising does a great job teaching the player how to manage their resources, since at level 1, Frank will have almost no health and barely any inventory slots to hold items in. You're gonna have to find weapons and defend yourself, and a player will have to decide whether to stock up on weapons or healing items, or if they should balance the two. Sure, it's nice to have 5 guns on hand, but it won't take much to kill you. Frank turns into a glass cannon in some respects, given how having a good amount of weapons means you won't have to worry as much about zombies attacking him. On the other hand, having 5 gallons of orange juice to chug is great because you won't have to worry as much about dying, but having no way to defend yourself besides punching and kicking means Frank will have a tough time fighting his way out of a sticky situation. Inventory management is just as important to the player as time management is. The game even integrates the two by putting most weapons inside stores or tucked away in corners of the map, leading Frank away from the main path and costing him some time if the player wants to stock up. Preparing for a future threat is a good investment of a player's time, though, so it's usually worth it to explore. There are also a few goodies you can find, like this Uzi that's hiding above the photo store in Paradise Plaza, or even the shotgun hiding in a cluster of zombies during the initial rush to the security room at the start of the game. The mall is very angular and boxy, so it's usually obvious what Frank can and cannot climb if he jumps at it. Ledges are obvious, and the mall setting gives the game a good excuse for this. At the same time, a player might not think twice about this ledge near the stairs of Paradise Plaza. That's not to say climbing isn't clunky. It is more often than not a hassle, but it's a great means of finding stronger weapons. Oh yeah, Brad needs backup, doesn't he? Sorry, Brad, I was A little bit busy, you know, doing nothing. Well, we meet again, strange roof man. No doubt mad that we never answered his question, Carlito has taken up a defensive position in the mall's food court and is engaged in a firefight with Brad. Brad hands Frank another magazine for his pistol and says that they can talk after dealing with Carlito. Keep him busy, Brad. I'll be right with you. This is the first major fight in the game, and it's by no means an easy one. Carlito is tough, packing a submachine gun that he constantly spams. A low-level Frank will no doubt get his shit rocked unless he has spent some time preparing for this fight. That said, the boss fight is simultaneously easy and hard. Easy in the sense that Carlito is constrained to the upper walkway, meaning he won't chase you down, but hard in the sense that he can easily stun lock Frank to death with his gun. Not to mention the reach of his gun is pretty good. There are two ways to deal with Carlito, and most bosses in the game, in fact. Ranged or up close. You can either throw things at him, or shoot him from afar, or get up close and personal. Shooting is the easiest answer since most guns in Dead Rising are hit scan, so you'll just have to point and shoot while ducking in and out of cover, without worrying about leading your shots. Throwing stuff is a lot harder. You have to gauge how long the weapon will take to reach him, and early on, Frank's throw is pathetic. Trying to melee Carlito to death is also quite difficult, as getting close to him results in him rocking your shit. Brad also shows you how useless NPCs are at fighting, since his attacks are borderline useless, so it's entirely up to the player to deal with Carlito. I should also mention that headshots are accounted for, and will do more damage than body shots. Thankfully, Carlito's health bar is relatively small, so beating him isn't too difficult. How do I know Carlito's name, by the way? Because the game is hovering it over him. I think it would have been cooler to make his name question mark, since Frank learns it later in the plot anyway, and it would have been cool for the player to learn out at the same time. We don't know how involved he is with the plot, or what his motivations for the gunfight are, but I'm sure we can find out just as soon as we defeat— oh, he just ran away. We should be less worried about the zombies and more worried about the fact that this guy can phase through walls. Frank asks Brad who the mysterious man was, and Brad replies that he's clueless. Liar! Brad says he has nothing to tell Frank, but then Frank shows how good he is at leveraging information by flashing a picture of the old man that he took in the entrance plaza. Jesse had previously shown interest in the picture, and Frank had noticed. It's very nice to see him put two and two together, and then use this information to get more information. Frank West is a likable character right from the start. It's obvious that he's smart, often sussing out information from people with his sharp intuition. Frank notices how quiet the town is when he lands on the roof of the mall. He notices Jesse's reaction to the picture he took, showing that he's not some idiot who's stumbling onto the story. He's the one who's actively searching for it and getting leads as a result. It's fitting that Frank is a freelance photojournalist. It gives the story room to unfold in a natural way. It's not often that people are just expositing the plot at Frank. Frank is the one who's asking the questions and leading the conversation in most scenarios. He knows something's up and he wants to document the truth, no matter what. As a result, Frank's goals often line up with the player's goals, uncovering the story, helping Brad and Jesse in exchange for more information, and trying to rescue as many people as possible while he's at it. But there can also be a slight disconnect if the player wastes time dicking around the mall instead. There are no requirements for saving survivors, except for those associated with cases. He, more often than not, keeps a cool head and a poker face, but occasionally it slips. He's brave and resourceful and can combat any scenario you throw at him, and Frank takes most of the information he gets with a grain of salt, knowing that not everyone is going to tell the truth. Plus, he's covered wars, you know. It's also nice to see Frank succeed little by little. He's an unconventional underdog. He said it himself, he's going in with no backup. Frank is either the dumbest man alive or the most courageous. For a man with absolutely nothing to start with, he slowly peels back the layers of the plot to an impressive degree. And while a little bit of the plot revolves around luck, Frank is often seen using every last resource he has to uncover the truth. Resources like Otis keeping an eye on the monitors, or Jesse and Brad's information. Speaking of, Brad realizes that he needs Frank's information, and the two decide to work together for the time being. It's a temporary alliance formed between two people working towards similar goals. He explains that Jesse and him are DHS agents who are looking for the man in the picture. Frank ponders about what Homeland Security are doing here and wonders if Carlito is some kind of terrorist. It's a very good deduction. That's all the information he gets, however, before Brad zips his lips, and the two head off towards the entrance plaza. If the player took their time getting to the food court to help Brad, there's a chance that they have been called Otis and told of 2 scoops that take place in Alfresco Plaza. Scoops trigger based on the in-game clock, and these scoops are set to begin at 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Since Brad leads the player through Alfresca on their way to the entrance plaza, these scoops become active as soon as the player enters the area near them, which is hard to avoid, really. What makes this worse is that leaving an area after activating a scoop means the survivors involved with it will start losing health. At the same time, it's more convenient to deal with these survivors while playing through the first case. The developers have set you up for a win, basically. That said, there are a few things to keep in mind. Once the player deals with this segment of the case, they are forced to use Alfresca to return to the security room, meaning those NPCs won't have much health drain in Frank's absence if the player has decided to ignore them for now. Brad has a health meter as well in this case, and the NPC's AI is so abysmal that there is a chance that Brad can die on his way to the entrance plaza. Though Brad is at least equipped with a gun, so he can defend himself competently. One of the scoops pertains to a pair of guys who have barricaded themselves in a store. They also attack Frank on sight, which is a neat touch. The game has fun with its survivors, even if I don't. You have to pacify your attacker by beating the shit out of him. Be careful that you don't beat him up too much or he will defect. Survivors can defect if Frank hurts them too much. What sucks about that is it's easy to accidentally hurt a survivor while trying to save them from a horde of zombies. Not to mention that survivors have the self-preservation skills of a toddler in a lumber mill. The other scoop that takes place in Alfresco on day 1 is a mother's lament, which involves jumping behind a display case at this jewelry store and talking to this woman. Before I continue talking about this case, I should probably mention that Dead Rising's tone is 1 part wacky, 1 part cliche action romp, and 1 part grounded drama. You can put on silly clothes, throw frisbees at zombies, throw pies in faces, but at the same time there's a serious plot going on about surviving a zombie outbreak and dealing with what appears to be a terrorist on the loose. There are also moments where the story has down-to-earth character moments, which occupies the same game as this man's balls being lit on fire. It's important that I mention this now, since A Mother's Lament has this woman talking about how the zombies ate her baby, and that she will never forget the sound of her baby screaming as it died. Though nothing is as horrible as the fact that she can barely walk and Frank has to fucking carry her back to the safe room. At least carrying a survivor means they can't hurl themselves dick first into a giant horde of zombies. Frank can't attack while carrying her either. So the best course of action is to occasionally set her down and clear a path to run through before grabbing her again. Since we're still on day 1, a lot of these scoops are spaced out and generously timed. The player has quite a lot of time to dick around and still save these people. Even then, you can easily book it to the food court and help Brad before these 2 scoops even pop up. So long as you stay away from Alfresca, you can wait until 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. on day 2 before the scoops have failed. Oh shit, I forgot about Brad. Hey buddy, sorry for the wait. I had to rescue these 2 idiots and this emotionally ruined mother. Once we exit Alfresca and make our way to the entrance plaza, a cutscene begins where Brad opens this gate leading to the section of the mall. First off, why can't we do that without Brad? He just walked over to the box on the wall and pressed a button. What, did he have a key or something? Second, why the fuck doesn't he open the other gate leading to Paradise Plaza and save us a trip? Brad, come on, it will save me a lot of trouble if you open that up right now. The obvious reason he doesn't open the second gate is so the game can continue to introduce mechanics to the player by feeding progress through a small circuit of the mall. It's no coincidence that this case starts and ends in the security room. Brad tries to talk to the old man, whose name we find out is Dr. Barnaby, but he doesn't want to leave the bookstore he's holed up in. Personally, I think it's a great touch to have him staying in a bookstore, since it's more than likely he's reading to pass the time while he waits for someone to save him. It also stops the player from obtaining a few skill books, which is a natural way to gate them off. We'll talk more about skill books in a minute, but first we have to deal with this.
Sir, if you could just kindly come with us, we can wrap this whole thing up.
No, I'm not leaving until you can
Absolutely,
guarantee
sir.
me
If
safe
you
passage
just open
to
this
these...
gate. Just open this gate.
No.
It's for your protection. Just
I am
come
not
with us.
opening any gate. Thank you very much. I'm going to stay right here
Dr.
when
Barnaby.
it's safe.
Sir.
Thank you and goodbye.
Dr. Barnaby?
Goodbye.
Why does this scene feel like it's completely ad-libbed? Sir, please open this gate. I'm not opening this gate. Sir, I want you to open this gate. I don't want to open this gate.
Well, what happened?
He turned down my offer to protect him. Said he isn't going anywhere until I can guarantee a secure route out of here. Jesse has a direct line to HQ. The first thing we need to do is to call for backup.
After that's cleared up, we're free to roam the rest of Entrance Plaza. We got a taste for it at the beginning of the game when the zombies were first let into the mall, but now we're given the proper chance to explore. Personally, I feel like Entrance Plaza is one of the better sections in the mall, but I barely spent any time in it in any of my playthroughs. There are tons of different stores to explore in this plaza, and plenty of variety to boot, but it just feels so out of the way despite its location next to the warehouse you have to go through every time you leave the security room. The two exits are located right across from each other, but a player will rarely need to venture to the food court or al fresco for any reasons, story related or otherwise. The courtyard will see more use since it provides access to more sections of the mall, and given its central location, it's usually faster to use than to try and skirt around it. As we'll soon find out, the timer will get more and more strict. The player is told to go back to the security room so Jesse can contact HQ. Something I like about this game is that they don't teleport Frank from place to place as the story unfolds. It's up to the player to get Frank back to the security room. While it pays to be ahead of schedule, there's nothing stopping a player from completely ignoring the story for a few in-game hours to dick around and try to level up. In fact, dicking around is sometimes paid off. In the entrance plaza on the first day, there is a survivor stuck behind a wall of boxes in this store right here. This man is easily missed if you're not thoroughly exploring the mall, and it's here where the player finds Bill.
Try shooting the bad guys, Fox.
An unmarked scoop. Dead Rising pulled a little sneaky on ya. There are scoops that aren't actually given to the player outright. Hidden survivors that occasionally pop up around the mall. This sounds scary, doesn't it? Knowing that there are unmarked scoops that the player can easily miss if they're not vigilant enough. Well, fret not, because Bill is the only one that's really hard to find without a guide. Most unmarked scoops are put in the path of the player, especially if they're going to any of the main cases. So it's usually not hard to miss them. Some of them are in locations of importance where a player is going to be naturally drawn to, like the gun shop in the North Plaza, and most of them have generous timing, lasting a few in-game hours. By the way, Otis may forget to call Frank if he's in the same plaza that a scoop takes place in. For example, if the player is in Alfresca when the barricaded pair or a mother's lament are supposed to pop up, Otis will not call the player with those scoops. It's a weird quirk, and I assume it's due to how the engine handles these side missions, rather than a bug or maybe an oversight. It's probably easier for the game to load certain NPCs and scripts on a transition into an area as opposed to popping them up while Frank is walking around the same plaza. A lot of NPCs have unique objects around them, like the barricade for the scoop in Alfresca, or unique situations taking place nearby. It's a shame that this quirk exists though, as a player can actually miss out on scoops if they stay in the same plaza for too long. Aside from that, there's also a limit to how many survivors Frank can recruit at once. 8. Hitting this limit is pretty tough to do unless the player is deliberately avoiding taking survivors back to the security room, and most of the time, the best strategy for leading survivors is to gather a few of them at a time before heading back. In this case, it was convenient for us to grab the barricaded pair at the same time we grab a mother's lament, but there are rarely situations where Frank can easily hit that limit. A player has to go out of their way to try and hit that cap, and there are actually 2 achievements related to doing so, one for hitting the max limit, and one for having 8 female survivors in your party. If Frank does have 8 survivors following him, Otis will no longer call Frank and give him scoops. Again, I'm assuming this is a limitation of the engine and not so much a developer oversight. It would be weird if Otis still gave Frank scoops, but when you went to the scoops location in the mall, it isn't active, so it'd be like an empty spot. There would also more than likely be some problems with how the game executes code if it's trying to execute too many at once. Overall, it's a rare problem to encounter, so I'm more than willing to overlook it. For a launch title released in 2006, it's surprising how few bugs and glitches made it into the game. Look away. This is intentional gameplay. You won't see items falling through the floor or clipping through walls, or survivors completely poofing out of existence. The entire game is well polished and impressive from a consumer standpoint. When playing, you can tell the developers knew exactly how to extend gameplay organically and make the most of their assets and maps. It's insane how many zombies can appear on screen at one time, and is impressive from a technical standpoint. This was released on the Xbox 360 and made the most of the hardware, especially in 2006. Do you even remember 2006? Fucking Heroes and Dexter and Death Note and fucking wow wubsy. What impresses me more is the fact that, aside from this poster saying otherwise, Dead Rising could really take place anywhere from the 90s to the early 2010s. It feels timeless, and at the same time, timed time. The only real sign that this game takes place in the 90s is the horrible fashion sense of all of the survivors, though. Colorado is a great setting for the game, and part of the charm is how this rather sizable city feels like a small town. The mall, despite its size, feels quaint and comfy. Willamette is the kind of place that I would go with my friends on the weekend. I can relate, since I grew up in a city where there was nothing to do except drink. Wow, look at the time. We should probably make our way back to the safe room. Hey look, some more survivors to save. Oh. Okay. Oh my god! This song slaps. This is the first time the player can encounter a psychopath, which are Dead Rising's boss enemies. Carlito was just a sampler of what the game had to offer, and where he was more of a tutorial, the convicts are your first real challenge. You can totally ignore them, but getting close to their vehicle will result in Frank turning to Swiss cheese and a player losing a heavy chunk of progress. That is, if they forgot to save. Fuck. Dead Rising is a game released in 2006 by Capcom. Let's talk about psychopaths in Dead Rising, because much like survivors, they're all unique. While some consider Carlito to be the first, I consider the convicts as the first instead. Psychopaths are normal, everyday people who have snapped due to the zombie outbreak. Some are relatable, having lost their families or loved ones, and some are outright sadistic, no longer worried about the consequences of their actions. And some, like the convicts, were just waiting for an opportunity to raise some hell. What makes psychopaths a great gameplay element is their lack of flair. A player usually won't know which scoops are or are not psychopath encounters going in, and that's part of the fun. Sure, it could be some more survivors that need saving, and more often than not there are survivors to save from these psychopaths. But it could also be a boss fight that could rock your shit. What's also great about these boss encounters is the fact that they can be learned and avoided too. Dead Rising, in and of itself, is built from the ground up to be replayed as much as possible, and we'll touch more on that later. So it makes sense to have these bosses be tough at first, but easier when the player learns how to deal with them. This sounds obvious, of course, but it's worth noting. It ties into the player's ability to manage their inventory as well, because these boss encounters could be right around the corner, so it might be wise to keep some good weapons on hand just in case. They are tougher to fight than zombies, that's for sure. Psychopaths are often holed up in different parts of the mall that make for interesting arenas. Some have their own dedicated arenas, like the grocery store guy and this guy, while others are just thrown into the store somewhere in the mall, like these people. What impresses me so much is that they have unique AI, which ties into how they attack a player. Some bosses will be more sporadic, while others stay in one place. Some will attack from afar, and some will attack near, and some are a combination of the two. And while I struggled to remember some of their names, their fights are more than memorable. Not to slack in any regard, Dead Rising also uses psychopaths to develop Frank as a character. Encounters with them often start with Frank trying to defuse the situation and talk them down. In fact, psychopaths always attack Frank first, barring, Paul. This guy. You can hit that guy first. The game makes it clear that these people are beyond saving. They aren't going to be rationed with, but they are still people like you and me. I mean, who wouldn't snap if everyone they loved was killed by zombies, or if somebody tried to steal your store? Psychopaths are just like other survivors. They just couldn't handle the stress of the zombie outbreak. And Frank seems to know this, often being respectful of these people even after fighting them. He kneels down and listens to Cliff talk about his family and how losing them made him snap. Frank tries to stop the gun shop owner from running into the mall even when he tried to kill Frank moments prior. Frank doesn't hate these people, at least not as much as he should. But the convicts are different. Once you defeat them, there's no cutscene. Nothing. My assumption is that the cutscenes often take place in a set location, as in one specific spot on the map. The courtyard, which is where you fight the convicts, is massive, and it wouldn't be fun if, after defeating them, the game teleported you to a specific location, which could be a ways away from where you wanted to go. Little concessions like these show that the developers knew what made their game compelling and challenging, yet fun. They aren't going to waste your time, at least not without purpose. The game is about time management, after all, so of course there are going to be scoops deliberately placed on opposite ends of the mall, with less than a few in-game hours to complete them both, but it's part of the challenge. Scoops will often lead a player away from the main cases and take you to obscure locations around the mall. This serves double duty, getting a player out of their comfort zone and making sure a player can see more of the map the developers spent so much time creating. Do you try to gather as many survivors as possible before taking them back, risking bringing them into a boss fight, or do you bank them as soon as you run into them? Do you spend a few extra minutes stocking up on weapons and health items, or do you try to brute force your way through everything? Choices like these are made frequently in the game, and everything is at a cost of a little time. This is especially the case for psychopaths, since they usually take a chunk of time to beat. There's also that chance that they'll kill you, which could waste real-life time as well. Psychopaths are a great addition and keep the game interesting, notably on a player's first playthrough of the game. We'll cover psychopaths more as we come across them though. First, let's fight these convicts. Given how frail and weak Frank is to start, I'd hazard a guess and say that most players will die within a few cases. Even experienced players like me have a hard time with a low-level Frank. I guess we should talk about what happens when you die then. After Frank bites the bullet, the player is given the option to either load their game from the last save, quit the game altogether, or save the character to a file. What does this option do? Well, I'm glad you asked, because herein lies another great decision from the developers. Saving your level and being able to start a new game with the same Frank is great and a fun reward for leveling him up. It means a player can spend their first run getting Frank into shape and using a fully leveled Frank in the second run. Speaking of, the level cap is 50. Once you hit that, Frank gets his maximum strength and stats. Leveling up is a fun way to meter gameplay for newbies. A low-level Frank is almost useless, being slow and weak and unable to hold many items. Overall, he's just kinda bad at killing zombies. But as those levels go up, Frank gets stronger and he's able to throw things harder, can walk a bit faster, hold more items, and has a longer health bar. Frank starts with 4 health boxes and inventory slots, but by level 50 he's sporting 12 of both. Leveling up also influences how strong Frank's attacks are, which is why it's so much easier to plow through the game with a level 50 Frank as opposed to a level 1 Frank. Though, credit where it's due, you can start a brand new game with a level 1 Frank and still rescue all the survivors and defeat all the psychopaths. I would know because I almost did it. I was going to do it for this review to prove it was possible, but the game bugged out at one point, and then 3 survivors just kind of vanished out of nowhere, meaning I wasn't able to pull off a perfect run. Which is a shame, really, since I spent an hour at one point trying to save a handful of survivors, juggling them between loading zones while trying to bring them all back to the security room, only for most of them to die off screen to zombies. Aside from expanding Frank's stats, leveling up also occasionally grants Frank a new skill. I have to say, basing them all off of wrestling moves was an inspired touch. Learning new skills is semi-random, as most skills have a 5-level gap where they can be learned. For example, the jump kick, a very useful move, is learned between levels 2 and 5. The double lariat is learned at level 16 through 20, the suplex is learned at level 26 through 30, and so on. You'll find most useful skills by level 5, that is the jump kick and the zombie ride, and soon after that you'll learn the dodge roll, with an absolutely horrible recovery time, but fret not, because later you learn a roundhouse kick and can cancel the end of the rolling animation, since that part of the animation counts as Frank landing from a jump. It's a whole thing. It's great. Frank learns fun wrestling moves like the lift up or the hammer throw or the giant swing. And for the most part, these do wonders in taking down zombies and clearing a path. By level 50, you'll have a wide repertoire of skills to have fun with. The game is only as hard as you make it. Sure, you could go for every survivor, unmarked or otherwise, and try to save everyone along the way. Yeah, you could start at a level 1 Frank, or you could just carry over a level 50 Frank from another playthrough. Playing the game without going for any survivors makes it more fun, if not less fulfilling. They're a great source of experience, so a player might be a little underleveled in the late game if they are ignored, though there is plenty of fun to be had killing every survivor you see after having to deal with them for such a long campaign. Wait, were we doing something? After defeating the convicts, you can also steal their car. Yeah, there's driving in this game. It's not very good. There are 5 vehicles you can drive when you go outside of the maintenance tunnels. I'll talk about the tunnels in a bit. All the vehicles feel the exact same to drive, which is not very good. They're unwieldy to handle and turn slower than most tanks do. At the same time, they're somehow heavier and lighter, being able to crash through zombies and hordes without slowing down, but at the same time flipping on their sides after crashing into a wall or hitting a small incline. Aside from exploiting the tunnels, there isn't much of a reason to get into one. Frank also refuses to get out of one unless it comes to a complete stop, which spoils some of the fun. I think they should have added a feature where you can roll out of your car and send it careening into a group of zombies. Survivors can also get in the passenger seats of vehicles, but since most of these are exclusive to the courtyard or the maintenance tunnels, there's no real purpose in shuttling these survivors. Also, there's the survivor to be saved when the convicts first spawn, Sophie. For the most part, she stays where she spawns, so the convicts don't really attack her, which is good. It's with her that we're also introduced to hand-holding. Just like some survivors need to be carried, some survivors need to be led by hand, otherwise they'll be a lot slower. This is tougher when you have a survivor that needs to be carried, and then you encounter a survivor who needs a hand. Because chances are you'll need to set the first survivor down and go back for the second. It's not too annoying, thankfully, since most survivors don't have the option to grab them and move them yourself. It's actually quite refreshing to be able to guide one by hand. You won't have to worry about them running dick first into a horde of zombies and immediately dying. At least, not as much. Weren't we doing something like really important? Oh, right, security room. Plot.
Damn.
God damn it, Frank, just get in the fucking elevator.
Shit. What in the hell is going on around here?
Huh. I guess they're not a fan of Queen. These are queen bees, and when killed, they kill all the zombies near them, for some reason. From this point on, queens start to appear in hordes of zombies. You'll know a zombie has a queen on them if they're reaching upwards and have a glowing dot on their neck. All you have to do is kill the zombie and the queen starts hovering near them, and then you can grab it. For some reason, Frank doesn't pick up the queen like he picks up every other item. They play a small animation of him swinging his hand in the air to imply he's catching it in a bottle. Honestly, I'd prefer he just reaches out and grabs it like he does everything else, because this shit is annoying to deal with sometimes. But enough about that, we have to get back to the safe room. We only have like 6 hours. Oh, come on. Yeah, also, when night falls, zombies become stronger and more aggressive and get glowing red eyes. If you thought they were annoying at the start, you're in for a real treat now. I hope the survivors aren't dying horribly right now. Zombies will remain in this new state of being until the sun rises in the morning and the mall opens up the next day. I almost forgot, the mall actually closes at night. Lights will turn off, escalators will stop moving, and the roller coaster in Wonderland Plaza shuts down. There's also an announcer that appears over the PA system, occasionally talking about Willamette, and will remind the player when the mall's about to close. It adds to the creepy vibes I get from the game. As if Dead Rising wasn't already creating a wonderfully cheeky atmosphere, the designers now switch from the slightly comedic tone to a completely creepy one. It's a stark change going from day to night as the cheeky facade of capitalism fades away to show the grime beneath. The mall is a character in and of itself, showing that money is just a construct, and at the end of the day, we're all empty inside, just like this mall. You see, the mall is a metaphor detailing the daily grind that most of us will put up with until we die, and even then we're not guaranteed rest, walking among the mall like animals. The dead continue to go about their daily lives while devouring every living thing they touch, absorbing its culture and homogenizing it, turning everything into more zombies, ignoring tact and finesse, opting for brutal forward advancement, conquering everything in their path. Destruction is left in their wake and devouring the mighty fist of the undead. Whatever, we're back at the security room. Hey, we even managed to save some people. Damn, that makes it worth it. Finally, back at the safe room, Frank is able to have a chat with Brad and Jesse.
So that's what Dr. Barnaby said, huh?
The old coot's not dumb. He wants us to call for help first. We got a line out or what?
The signal's being blocked. I can't even contact HQ on the emergency line.
So, if we want to get our hands on Dr. Barnaby, we're gonna have to secure a way out of here ourselves. The boneheads back at HQ might be working on something too.
By the way, who the fuck says boneheads?
You came by helicopter, didn't you?
There's a helicopter coming. 3 days from now. At noon. It's my ride.
Is your ride reliable?
Absolutely. That's how I plan on getting out of here.
All right then. I'll see to it that the DHS picks up the charter fee. Can we take Dr. Barnaby as well?
Sure, as long as you tell me what's going on.
Okay. I'll tell you what you want to know. Later. We have more pressing business right now.
Brad takes the initiative to go and search for water, blankets, and the like. He says they'll grab Dr. Barnaby in the morning and Jesse should keep an eye on the monitors in the meantime, and Frank is finally getting some progress on his story and has something to write down. There's plenty of intrigue, as I've said before, but at least we're making headway. Why is Dr. Barnaby so important? Why is there a terrorist on the loose? Where did these zombies come from? Well, at the very least, Frank now has a few contacts and solid leads. And so ends case 1. There are 8 cases in total, with varying lengths and challenge. Case 1 is a cakewalk meant to introduce players to mechanics, and they'll be dealing with those mechanics for the rest of the game. Honestly, it does a good job at teaching a player along the way. By now, the game has introduced zombies as a threat, both in the story and gameplay, has shown a player what survivors are and how you might go about escorting them, thrown a psychopath or two at the player as a nice challenge, put queens into play, and shown that zombies get more aggressive at night. All this before the first mission is over. The cherry on top is the fact that this is done almost entirely through gameplay, only using the story to tie elements here and there. A driving force has been introduced, Frank the photojournalist. A freelance tour de force with a camera and a strong sense of curiosity, not to mention aspirations of wrestling stardom. His obstacles include not only the undead, but the undead Homeland Security agents who aren't exactly cluing him in on the going-ons of the mall and what caused the outbreak, both of their own accord and ignorance to the truth. Frank uses what little leverage he has to great effect and shows what a quick-witted person he is as a result. The three decide to temporarily work together for the benefits of all parties involved, not because Frank is a leech for information, but because he proves he could be useful in a pinch. He survived this long, after all. Not only that, but he also saved some survivors at this point. He also may have brutally murdered some, so let's not count that as a point in his favor. They're all playing major roles in the plot, and as we'll soon find out, they're all quite good at gathering information. The story is moving at a steady pace, and we've already laid the foundation for what's to come. All of this is done within the first hour of gameplay. That said, it's also important to note that not every player is going to be as efficient as I was in this playthrough. So my case 1 is done with 6 hours to spare, but someone else could easily just use those 6 hours to explore without doing case 1, leaving it for much later. If they ended up doing that, they might meet the convicts before the Carlos boss fight, and might even have a tougher time going through Alfresca with Brad later because They might have waited until nightfall to do the main case, where zombies get tougher and more aggressive. They won't encounter queens before completing case 1-3 though, since that cutscene only plays when you've completed that segment of the case. If you are curious as to why the gate leading from Paradise Plaza to the entrance plaza is closed at first, here's the reason. A player has to go through the food court in order to get to Alfresco, where the 2 scoops are. The game is forcing you to confront Carlito before doing some side content, scoops in Alfresco, and is also giving the player 3 reasons to go to the food court, that is, case 1 and the 2 scoops. That's not to stop a player from fleeing the Carlito fight and going to Alfresco, leaving Brad in the wind, but it's not advised as most players won't know it's a possibility in the first place. Even with the vast amount of freedom given to the player at the start of the game, all players are given the same broad strokes in the form of the first case. It's smart in a way that I don't see enough in modern video games. Looking back at a 15-year-old game and seeing how well they got things right on the first try makes me pine for the better days when game devs knew what the fuck they were doing. I also enjoy how fast the story moves along. Frank isn't one to pursue red herrings. From the outset, it's obvious this isn't his first rodeo, that is, with journalism, not with zombies, so he knows a good lead when he sees one. There's enough coincidence involved to paint Frank as a lucky son of a bitch, but I'm happy to overlook this for the sake of brevity in the story.